This crash didn't come out of nowhere. Ironically, just 10 days earlier, Air India's top brass, led by the CEO, Campbell Wilson, was briefing journalists at a major aviation summit in Delhi. And they were celebrating, Air India was celebrating the airline's halfway mark in its ambitious transformation program called Vihan.ai. Lots of bad baggage. Its workforce was bloated. The systems it adopted were archaic, the work culture deeply bureaucratic, and as one aviation expert whom India Today spoke to put it, when the government-owned Air India was there, it was run by babus with zero aviation knowledge, and he said you can't change that overnight. Just to give you an example, of the 199 aircraft operated by Air India, 35% are over 10 years old. 35% or a third of their fleet are over 10 years old. 43 of them have crossed the 15-year mark. AIESL does 70% of their maintenance, Air India's maintenance. Air India now partners with SIA Engineering, Lufthansa Technique, Honeywell, and others. Of course, concerns persist about the maintenance. A 2023 engine failure, as one example, was traced back to a faulty installation from 2018. Now, internal documents show that on August 4, 2023, a London-bound Air India Dreamliner, similar to the one that crashed in Ahmedabad, was forced to return to Mumbai after an engine shut down during the climb. By 2024, because of the shortage of Indian pilots, it had to hire 58 foreign pilots to fly their leased 777s. Meanwhile, Vistara's merger into Air India caused turbulence. There was junior pilots who saw their pay slashed by 50%, and protests erupted. The Ahmedabad crash has further heightened scrutiny of crew preparedness and safety practices. Hello, I'm Raj Chengappa of India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. This is my weekly X-ray of key issues that matter to you without giving you any BS, just the truth. On June 12th, 2025, an Air India Dreamliner flight bound for London met with a catastrophe within seconds after takeoff from the Ahmedabad airport. 241 people on board AI-171 lost their lives. 19 more perished on the ground where the aircraft crashed into a medical college facility. It was one of the most devastating incidents in India's aviation history, but this crash didn't come out of nowhere. Ironically, just 10 days earlier, Air India's top brass, led by the CEO, Campbell Wilson, was briefing journalists at a major aviation summit in Delhi. And they were celebrating, Air India was celebrating the airline's halfway mark in its ambitious transformation program called Vihan.ai. Now, the CEO Campbell's big message was Air India had moved from stabilization to sufficiency, that it was ready to fly higher than ever. That was the words he talked. But that image was shattered on June 12th, and the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau is learned to have submitted its preliminary crash report to the center, though the findings remain undisclosed. Now, while we wait for the official report on why the crash happened, in this episode of Nothing But the Truth, we will analyze what Tata Group needs to do to fix Air India and build back both the airliner's credibility and reliability. But first, a bit of background. Air India was born in 1932 and was privately owned by the Tata Airlines at that time. After nationalization in 1953, the Tata Group lost control and the government took over. But in January 2022, nearly 70 years later, the airline returned home to the Tatas. The timing wasn't ideal. The airline was bleeding money. It lost close to rupees 9,591 crores in 2022 alone, and its overall debt was rupees 60,000 crores. Now, the Tatas took on rupees 15,300 crore of that to acquire it, while the rest of the debt was offloaded to a government holding company. Tatas had got back into the aviation business even before it acquired Air India. If you recall, it had launched AirAsia India in 2014 and Vistara in 2015. By late 2024, after they'd acquired Air India, the Tata Group had merged 4 carriers into 2, which is essentially Air India and Air India Express. The Tata's ambition was to build a world-class airline, and initially, things seem to have gone well for Tata's. In fact, India's civil aviation sector is booming with as many as 376 million passengers flying in 2024 alone. That made India the world's 3rd largest aviation market. The Tatas wanted a big share of that pie. Air India CEO Campbell said that Air India was gearing up to connect to what he called far-flung destinations worldwide. But then Flight AI-17 crashed, and everything, as we know, changed. Soon after that, there was a lot of mayhem that was happening. In fact, I was on a flight to Paris when it got cancelled, and I had to wait a bit. And then when on my return from there, Germany, I again got a flight cancelled. And there were something like 83 international flights that were cancelled, Air India flights that were cancelled in a particular week. And Air India's long-haul operations were reduced by 15%. The Director General of Civil Aviation launched an inquiry, and 3 senior officials were dismissed. A special probe panel chaired by the Home Secretary began its work on looking into what's going on and what needs to be done. Now let's analyze what are the major challenges that the Tata Group would have to work on if it has to fix Air India. And we have identified 6 major challenges that Air India would have to do to get back its credibility and, of course, its reliability. The first is getting rid of the baggage of its past. Now, as a government-owned entity, Air India came with lots of bad baggage. Its workforce was bloated, the systems it adopted were archaic, the work culture deeply bureaucratic, and as one aviation expert whom India Today spoke to put it, when the government-owned Air India was there, it was run by babus with zero aviation knowledge. And he said, you can't change that overnight. Now, Air India has to fix all these issues, and it is still work in progress. India's largest airline, Indigo, which has a fleet of 400+ aircraft, now flies more than 2,200 daily flights to more than 130 destinations. That's India's number 1 airliner. And Air India has to compete with that. Air India is still far behind in terms of their operations. It operates daily flights to 44 domestic and 44 international destinations, and currently has a combined fleet strength of 308 aircraft, along with its subsidiary Air India Express. Air India reported revenues of rupees 61,000 crores in financial year 25, that is 2024-25, but it had posted losses of rupees 4,444 crore in the previous financial year, which is down by 54% from the financial year 22 levels, but still very, very high. There are other major concerns it needs to address to successfully overcome the current crisis. And Air India says that 59% of its domestic fleet and 40% of its international aircraft have been upgraded, and the cabins have been upgraded, but many aircraft are still flying well past their prime. So that's the second big challenge that Air India faces. Tatas must update Air India's aging fleet rapidly. Just to give an example, of the 199 aircraft operated by Air India, 35% are over 10 years old. 35%, or a third of their fleet, are over 10 years old. 43 of them have crossed the 15-year mark. 43 of these aircraft have crossed the 15-year mark. The Dreamliner that crashed in Ahmedabad was 12 years old. To fix this, Air India had already placed a record order in February 2023 to buy 470 aircraft worth $70 billion. Now, this mix includes A320 Neos, 737 Maxes, A350s, and also the Dreamliner 777s that are there. Deliveries, though, will run from starting in 2025 right up to the 2030s. So it will take a while for the Air India's aircraft to become upgraded, become younger in terms of the overall fleet. So let's look at the third big challenge, which is the maintenance of Air India's fleet. Now, maintenance, as we all know, is the lifeblood of aviation safety. Air India's planes are mostly serviced by AIESL. It's a profitable government PSU, but AIESL wasn't part of the Air India sale. Some believe that was a mistake, that the government should have sold it to Air India, to the Tata Group, along with the main airliner that's there. So as a result, the airline now partners, while AIESL does 70% of their maintenance, Air India's maintenance, Air India now partners with SIA Engineering, Lufthansa Technik, Honeywell, and others. Of course, concerns persist about the maintenance. A 2023 engine failure, as one example, was traced back to a faulty installation from 2018. Now, internal documents show that on August 4th, 2023, a London-bound Air India Dreamliner, similar to the one that crashed in Ahmedabad, was forced to return to Mumbai after an engine shut down during the climb. Apparently, a fan blade in the engine's high-pressure section had broken loose, causing the failure. Now, investigators found that the blades locking the lugs had been incorrectly installed in 2018 and had stayed that way. So that was one of the major flaws that had been noticed. And meanwhile, a lot of whistleblowers allege that cover-ups, including alleged incidents involving oxygen systems, insufficient on ultra-long haul flights, which becomes very dangerous for the passengers. The DGCA also began inspecting all 33 Dreamliners after the crash. 29 were cleared by late June, but the doubts remain. So maintenance is the other big thing that we needed to look at. I said that's the third big thing. The fourth big challenge that Air India faces is the expected shortfall of experienced pilots and captains or commanders. Now, pilots are the human edge of airline safety. Maintenance is one part, pilot experience is the other major criteria. Air India has just over 3,200 pilots, but it needs nearly double that to operate its future fleet. By 2024, because of the shortage of Indian pilots, it had to hire 58 foreign pilots to fly their leased 777s. Meanwhile, Vistara's merger into Air India caused turbulence. There was junior pilots who saw their pay slashed by 50%, and protests erupted. The Ahmedabad crash has further heightened scrutiny of crew preparedness and safety practices. In fact, June 20, the DGCA highlighted what it called systemic failures in scheduling protocol and oversights. That led to 2 Air India flights from Bengaluru to London exceeding the maximum allowable duty hours on consecutive days in May, which the DGCA clamped down on. So they need to get that act together as well in terms of pilots and their experience, as well as overcome the shortages they're likely to have when they buy that whole load of aircraft that they plan to acquire in the next couple of years. The fifth big challenge for the Tata Group is fixing the delays in flight and dependability of Air India. Fair enough, there's been a lot of disruption because of other reasons, whether it was the Israel-Iran war, and of course the crash that happened. So we saw a huge amount of cancellations and delayed flights in this particular month, June, and of course hanging on to July as well. Punctuality is key to an airline success, and of course its profitability. Now in October 2022, Air India clocked, it says, an impressive 90.8% on-time performance. But by December 2024, that is last year, that on-time performance dropped to 67.6%. What does that mean? That 1 out of every 3 Air India flights was getting delayed. Indigo, by comparison, had a better maintained record. It was 73.4%, which in Indigo's case is 1 out of 4 flights experienced some delays. Better than Air India, but of course Indigo can also do better. Air India says that its Cirium report, which is one of the established ways of checking punctuality, that it had ranked it among Asia's top 10 most punctual carriers in March 2025. Still, the data shows inconsistency, and clearly far, far more needs to be done to improve the situation. And of course, passengers like you and me will tell them that they need to keep time. They cannot just cancel whenever they feel like. There is also growing anxiety among crew members in the aftermath of the crash, and that is causing concerns over mounting fatigue, morale, and whether the airline is stretching its resources too thin. That's the questions that people are asking. And so that brings us to the whole safety debate. I'd outlined 6 of the big challenges that Air India faces, including the need for more pilots and experience as well, the entire punctuality issue, maintenance issues that were there that had caused it, of course, discarding the old baggage that had come and getting themselves a newer fleet in terms of aircraft. These are the big issues that Air India faces, which brings us to the whole safety debate. And we can see that not just for Air India, production pressures can certainly erode safeguards, and the system, overall, aviation system in India and in Air India needs better checks. There are calls by experts to have independent audits, to have whistleblower protection, because one whistleblower got into trouble by pointing out certain issues, and that whistleblower happened to be one of the pilots of an airliner, and tighter regulatory oversight. To its credit, since Air India was taken over by the Tata Group in 2022, the airline has rejuvenated its staff. The average age, Air India says, of its non-flying staff has dropped from 54 to 35. Remember, Air India was taken over from the government of India. Earlier, government of India ran Air India, and the Tatas took it over 3 years ago. They say that they've been able to bring down not only the average age of non-flying staff, which I said from 54 to 35, the average age of the cabin crew is now down to 29 years of age. So they are showing improvement, and they did that by getting over 6,000 employees to take voluntary requirement and inducting new blood. Still, public perception is hard to change overnight. India Today spoke to Jitendra Bhargava. He's a former Air India executive and is a known aviation expert, and he says Air India should learn from Air France after Air France had a crash in 2009. He said Air India should not retreat, but reform. Now, consultants say that Tata Group must now lead what they call a safety renaissance in Indian aviation. Tata Sons chairman N. Chandrasekaran was right when he said that the tragedy, the air tragedy that happened, the crash that happened, must be a catalyst. It is one that should force Air India and the entire aviation ecosystem to evolve. Air India has the legacy, the funding, the vision. It now needs execution, consistency, and above all, trust. If this is done, then Air India, all these issues that I talked about, if Air India does that, they would be able to win back the trust, bring back the reliability and the credibility of this airline. All of us are invested in terms of getting it back on its feet. It needs to make that big move. And of course, safety is one of the biggest concerns, and it has to take care of that. We cannot have any more crashes. For more details on how to fix Air India, you can read the cover story in India Today magazine done by my colleagues M.G. Arun and Abhishek Dastidar. Thank you for being with me in this episode of Nothing But the Truth. I look forward to having you with me next week. Nothing but the truth.